Good afternoon, folks. Thanks for joining us for the webinar this afternoon. We're going to let a few more folks filter in. We are a few minutes early still, but thanks for joining us, and we'll get started shortly. Thanks, everyone, for your patience while we wait for a few more folks to filter in who have registered. And thanks for joining us today. We'll get started in just a little bit. Thanks, everybody, for your patience. We're going to wait just a couple more minutes before we get started, just to try to get to a bit of a critical mass since we're just after 1 p.m. But thank you so much for joining us today for the Funding Integration Tool for Sourcewater webinar. All right, well, let's dive right in then. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Funding Integration Tool for Sourcewater webinar. Thank you all for joining us today. A few quick housekeeping notes. I'll start first with my name. I'm Megan Rogales. I'm the Schuylkill Action Network Manager with the Partnership for the Delaware Estuary. And we're thrilled that you could join us today to learn more about this tool that EPA has developed. A few quick Zoom reminders. Please ask questions in the Q&A tab. We would love for you to say hello or introduce yourselves in the chat. Tell us who you're joining us, what organization you're with, and where you're joining us from today. So please feel free to jump in on the chat and say hello. We'll keep that open, but please hold your questions for our presenters today for the Q&A tab. And we are recording this webinar, so just a note that this is being recorded for your reference. I wanted to do a quick thank you to our partners for today's webinar, the Brandywine Red Clay Alliance. Brian Winslow is here with us today. Brian, I'm actually going to hand it over to you right now for a little bit of introduction as well.
Thanks, Megan. Hello from Chester County, Pennsylvania. I'm Brian Winslow with Brandywine Red Clay Alliance, and glad to see some Chester County folks. We represent the Chester Christina Watersheds Municipal Partnership. We're 42 municipalities working on water quality and MS4, and also our Christina Basin Task Force. We're a bi-state group working in the Christina Basin for over 20 years. And so glad that you could join us. And I want to thank our panelists today for taking the time to share this information with us. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. I also do want to quickly introduce my colleague, Katie Evers, who is running the tech, the Zoom goodness behind the scenes for the most part. She's there in her mask. Katie, if you can quickly say hi.
Hi, everyone. My name's Katie. I work with Megan at the Partnership for the Delaware Estuary. If you have any tech issues going on or need any help, I'm here for you. Just go ahead and message us in the chat and I'll be keeping an eye out. Thanks for joining.
And thanks again to our partners at EPA, specifically the team in Sourcewater at Region 3 for helping us pull together this great group of panelists today. And to our panelists who I am going to hand it over to now. Kara Goodwin and April Byrne are joining us representing EPA headquarters to show us what FITS can do for us. And I will hand over the reins. Thank you both so much for this demo that you're going to share with us today.
Great. Thanks, Megan. We're real excited to be here with you guys today. We released this tool back in November, I believe, November, December time. We've worked on it for about 2 years. A lot of input from regions and states and other stakeholders. And we're real excited to have it out there in the world and have been doing a lot of these presentations with groups to give a little tutorial and share all the information that's in the tool and hopefully inspire you to use it the next time you're thinking about your funding opportunities. April, can you, yeah. So like Megan said, my name is Kara Goodwin. I work at, let's see, April, you're showing, there we go, perfect. I work at EPA headquarters in the Sourcewater Protection Program. I do have a long history of connection to Region 3 though. My family, I grew up in New York. My family always spent a lot of time in the summers in the Delaware coast, Rehoboth and Dewey Beach areas. And then I went to college in the Philadelphia area. I went to Bryn Mawr College. And then after some time on the West Coast, I returned to the Northeast and have been in DC for about the last 5 years. So a lot of connections to Region 3 and the watersheds that you all work in. So thanks for all the great work you do. But let's get into the tool. So next slide. I should mention April will be giving the live demonstration and she can introduce herself when we get to her part. But you know, as I mentioned, we get a lot of feedback and input and requests from our stakeholders over the last, the 5 years that I've been at EPA at least. We would go out and talk to folks about source water protection. And, as you all know, source water protection really is a broad field. And it crosses, it shares objectives with a lot of our other environmental programs. And unfortunately, there's not really a single, funding source that we can point to that is, specifically dedicated and consistently available for source water protection. So that requires, cross-program collaboration, which can be tricky. And, we've heard from a lot of our stakeholders that they needed help and guidance and tools to help them navigate the funding landscape. So that was the inspiration for this tool. We've learned from, there are a number of states out there who are real pioneers in this field and have, leveraged different funding sources in their source water protection programs over the years. But, recognizing that that can be a challenge and it requires close collaboration and good working relationships across programs. So, we wanted to produce a tool that would help identify these opportunities for collaboration, where we could present a lot of this information in an easy to understand and navigate resource that was easy to find. Another thing that we often think about a lot in source water protection is this idea of one water, treating our water resources kind of across, in the government, we talk about silos. So, not thinking about Clean Water Act or Safe Drinking Water Act, but thinking about managing the resource as a whole and where can we make these cross connections between programs and not necessarily being restricted to within the confines of a particular program that, you might be directly working with. Next slide. So our tool is a one-stop shop for information on major federal funding sources. So you'll see here we've included 11 funding sources, which I'll get to into more detail. And we chose these ones, the majority of them are from EPA and then a few other federal funding sources. And we see these as kind of the big players. We had to draw some boundaries around this project. So you may know of other funding sources that are not included in here, which is great, but we also, we had to focus our efforts to create this tool. And so you'll see we've got 11 that we consider to be sort of the big players and the ones that we hope will be most useful to folks at this point. We've included cross-program planning considerations so that folks can efficiently and effectively leverage these funding sources together for source water protection activities, including tips for long-term planning. So, as you are investing in, developing a plan for your organization, what sorts of things should you be thinking about down the road? Which funding sources are you think you might be interested in, and therefore what can you do now in this planning, during your planning, to set you up for success to reach those funding sources in the future. We have real world examples. We have a whole section on different stories from different state agencies and organizations on how they have leveraged these funds for their source water protection objectives. The tool is built into a Captivate module and is available on our website. So you can just click a link and get into the tool and start poking around and learning. Next.
Oh, sorry about that. I don't know, it's not moving. Come on, you can do it. There we go.
There you go. So when you open the tool, this is what you'll see. So I'm going to bring you through kind of a first level introduction of the structure of the tool, kind of the scaffolding, the way we have it set up. And then April will bring you through and talk through an example and show you how the different ways that you can bop around the tool. So, this tool provides an online interactive platform that helps users identify opportunities to leverage funding for source water protection. It's intended for states, tribes, and territories, federal agencies, watershed stakeholders, drinking water utilities, and users who are engaged with activities that protect sources of drinking water. Next. We have the tool broken into 3 sections. The first is source water protection and funding sources, a planning and funding coordination section, and finally an example section. The tool is not meant to be necessarily linear. You can go to any one of these sections at any point as you're clicking around the tool. They're all interconnected and they link to each other, but you don't need to go through the funding sources section before you go to the planning and funding coordination. Next. So in the funding sources section, you'll see the 11 funding sources we've included. I know this might be a little hard for you to read on your screen, so I'll just quickly go through them. We've got both of the state revolving funds, the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund and the Clean Water Fund. The Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act program, also known as WIFIA, Leaking Underground Storage Tank Trust Fund, the Non-Point Source Management Program, also known as Section 319, Water Pollution Control Grants, also known as Section 106, the Indian Environmental General Assistance Program, or GAP program, and then the Wetland Program Development Grants program. So those are all the EPA funds. There's 8 of those, and then 3 from other federal agencies, the USDA, Natural Resources Conservation Service, NRCS, FEMA Hazard Mitigation Assistance Program, and the U.S. Forest Service Landscape Scale Restoration Program. So if you click on each of those boxes, you'll come to these descriptions, synopses of each of the programs. Here, we've really tried to distill the information on these programs that's relevant to source water protection. You'll see a number of tabs on the left-hand side for overview, uses, eligibility. We'll get into this a little bit more with April's walkthrough, but just wanted to show you the types of information that we've included, and we'll all kind of focus in on how it's relevant to the type of work that we do in source water protection. In the planning and funding considerations or coordination section, it's all based on this graphic that we have here, which is from our source water protection webpage, where we have kind of broken down a source water protection program and process into these 7 different components. So if you click on each of these wedges, it'll bring you to another page with more information on it. So go ahead and click. So for example, if you clicked on step 1, delineate a source water protection area, you get more information on what this means. That would be in the step overview. Here we have highlighted the funds to consider. So as you are in the process of kind of the first stage of a source water protection assessment and plan, you're delineating your source water protection area or your wellhead protection area. As you're doing this, if you think down the road, you might be interested in 106 funding or GAP funding, or taking advantage of the DWSRF set-asides. Here we have some kind of tips and guidance on what you need to consider during this step to help you engage with these programs in the future. Actually, I got that wrong, didn't I? I'm ahead of myself. So funds to consider, these are the funds that can help you complete this step. And then if you go to the next slide, April.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. On the planning consideration to access future funds, these are everything that I just said. So, thinking about accessing non-point source funding, in the future, here are some considerations while you're doing the delineation. You'll want to think about those critical areas in your non-point source area, as you're doing this delineation and thinking about what's in your source area and where your source area is. Sorry for that confusion. All right, next slide. And then finally,
so sorry, I'm going to stop sharing for 1 second and just mute my Teams. I'm not used to not being in Teams where it just automatically mutes everything, and I don't want to distract people anymore. So just keep talking if you want, and I'll come back on in a second.
Sure. Yeah, sorry about that, guys. So the final section we'll show you is examples, and we've collected examples for each of these funding sources and each of the steps in that kind of wheel of 7 parts of a sourcewater protection program from throughout the country. Some of the examples touch on multiple steps and multiple funding sources, but we really think this is very helpful. A lot of folks like to just really connect to examples and seeing how this work gets done in the real world. So like I mentioned, we have it organized by funding source. So if you click on a funding source, you can see the different examples. Next. And also we've got a button here for multiple programs. So these are all examples that have used multiple different funding sources to accomplish their work, leverage different funding sources. And then if you clicked on one of those examples here, I'll show you the Delaware Groundwater Monitoring Network. So you just get more information on the project objectives, the partners, the funding they use, the goals, accomplishments, that sort of information. April will show you how to click through each of these slides. Each of those little green circles at the bottom indicates that there's 4 pages of information on this case study. And then this is what it looks like. Organized by program component. But you'll see some of these case studies show up in multiple different spots because they connect to different program components or different funding sources. Next. So yeah, that's the brief overview, and I'll pass it over to April to walk you through and you can see how the tool works.
Okay, so hello everyone, my name is April Byrne. I'm an ORISE intern at EPA on the Sourcewater Protection team. So I work with Kara, and I'll be giving a live demonstration of 1 or 2 scenarios of how you could utilize FITS to identify some funding sources and take some steps for your Sourcewater Protection program. So you can access FITS through epa.gov/sourcewaterprotection/FITS.
Hey, April.
And
April, you're not
yes.
sharing your screen.
Oh, I'm not? That's weird. Let me try making this a separate window because it says I'm sharing. That is weird. Okay, can you see this?
Yes, great.
I guess I just had to make it a separate tab or a separate window. Okay, so here's the website. We'll probably put that in the chat for you at some point during the webinar so you can check it out. If you want to actually enter the tool, you can click on this picture here or the URL link here. There's also a 508 compliant version in a PDF included here. So we'll click on that. If you've been in FITS before, it'll ask you if you want to continue where you left off, and I don't. So I'm going to say cancel. And then you'll see your table of contents on the left and introductory slides that you can click play and go through if you'd like. And just some symbology here for, you can return to home, you can go back a few slides or go forward. If you hit back here, you will go back to the landing page on EPA.gov. So try to remember not to do that, and to try to remember to use these back tabs, or just use the table, clicking on the table of contents. These navigation sliders are in green or white sometimes, and so it's important to remember to click through. You might see some extra information that you didn't see before. And then also there's a glossary here if you wanted to double check on a definition of a financial term, or sometimes there's terms specific to a grant program. So that might be defined by a statute. If you keep clicking, it'll tell you who is this tool intended for: drinking water utilities, states, tribes, territories, federal agencies, and other stakeholders. And then this is the kind of introductory information about what does this tool include, which Kara pretty much already covered. So we'll just kind of skip through to the next one. A brief introduction of what Sourcewater protection involves. And then if you click through, you'll be taken to this landing page for the 3 main sections. So my advice for using FITS is that if you don't have a specific funding source in mind, or you have a scenario, a challenge to your water quality, and you're not entirely sure if there's more funding sources out there for you, I would say start at the Planning and Funding Coordination tab and think about how the activity or the program phase might fit into your scenario, and maybe start from one of these steps so that you can kind of look at it from a broad scale, and then start to get into the details of each of the funding sources. So the scenario we'll go through first is step 6 for protection. And I'm going to set myself a timer so I don't talk too long. So you are a water authority, and you're concerned about flooding that has occurred in the past, and you're concerned that it's going to continue to occur. Specifically, there are some agricultural lands that have flooded in the past, and also standing water near sites that store hazardous materials within your watershed. So you want to make sure that those nutrients and the hazardous materials stay put. And so you're interested in doing kind of a protection plan for those sites. In step 6, it's a little bit different because it's a lot more, many more opportunities and more activities that are potential ways to do source water protection. You can click through groundwater protection depending on your source, or you can do watershed protection for a surface water source, and then education and outreach. You'll find that the watershed protection and groundwater protection have a lot of similar activities and also very similar overlapping funding sources. So if you click on watershed protection, we'll pretend like we're a surface water. Our source water is surface water. And you'll see on the left a couple different categories of activities that could be funded. And so we're thinking of flooding prevention or flooding mitigation. And so you might not see specifically the words flooding in FITS in these activities. And so again, my advice is to try to think broadly. If you don't see something on here that you think is definitely a protection activity, try to take a step back and think of it in like a large category. So for instance, flooding could be related to a climate resiliency plan or implementing a part of that climate resiliency plan. So if you click on that, it'll populate a list of potential funding sources. And you can click on FEMA. We can go directly to the funding page, and you'll see here that there's an overview of the Hazard Mitigation Assistance Grant Program, which consists of 4 different grants: the Flood Mitigation Assistance Grant Program, Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, or BRIC Grant Program, and then the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program post-fire, which probably won't apply in this situation because we're not thinking about a wildfire or fire. You can see here that this general assistance program is used to mitigate and reduce disaster losses and protect life and property from future disasters. So Flood Mitigation Assistance Grant Program provides funds for projects to reduce or eliminate the risk of flood damage to buildings that are insured under National Flood Insurance Program. And then clicking through, you'll see specific overview for the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, which is for areas that have been declared as a presidential major disaster. So that might not apply in your specific scenario if you haven't had that declaration yet. And then Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, or the BRIC Grant Program, supports states, local communities, tribes, and territories as they undertake hazard mitigation projects, reducing the risk they face from disasters and natural hazards. So this is kind of like a pre-disaster planning program. And then this does not really apply, so we're just going to skip through. The uses tries to bring it back to how it relates to source water protection. So these are general activities that could be supported by these FEMA programs under the Hazard Mitigation Assistance Program. And you'll see here like rain gardens, other low impact development or green infrastructure, stormwater management type of projects, but then also floodplain and stream restoration or flood diversion and storage, and then property acquisition for risk reduction or land restoration. As you click further, you'll see that it starts to make more specific details on activities for the BRIC program. So for each program or grant program, here it says conducting a hydrologic and hydraulic studies for unmapped flood zones. Also updating current FEMA approved hazard mitigation plans. I'm not going to read all of this because it is a lot of reading. And then more specific activities relating to source water protection. And then if you click all the way through, for each funding source, I shouldn't say for each funding source, but for a lot of funding sources, when you get all the way through the uses tabs, there might be an additional pop-up that gives you a longer list of potential source water protection related activities. So this is not an exhaustive list, it's just examples. So if you think that something might apply here, and this goes for any funding source, if you think that something might apply here, but it's not listed, contact your state representative for that funding program and double check. So just to make sure that you're not missing anything. And then eligibility, the states, territories, and federally recognized tribes are eligible, but they must have a FEMA approved standard or enhanced hazard mitigation plan. So that's something that we touched on earlier in the presentation with Kara, was that in order to be eligible for funds in the future for mitigating like flood risks or disaster risks, you need to have this FEMA approved standard or enhanced hazard mitigation plans to access the FEMA funds. Local governments are considered sub-applicants. So as a water authority, a local drinking water provider, you must submit sub-applications to your applicant state. And it also lists here a contact page for finding your state representative, your state hazard mitigation officer. And that's very similar to each funding source. You'll be provided usually a link either to the main funding page where you can see that state contact. And then annual funding information. We'll just kind of click through. This is very general information. And then the funding structure, just one important note is that there is a cost share involved. And so if there's a cost share involved in these funding sources, we try to give you that information up front. So for FEMA, the fund cost share requirement is 25%. So this could be a combination of cash or in-kind sources. And then some limitations, just that these, you might be very much thinking about source water protection, but you need, for this particular funding program, you need to make sure that it's linked to some other mitigation activity to justify the needs, and that there can't be any duplication of these flood prevention activities from other federal funding agencies. And then additional program information has, sometimes fact sheets or a handbook on how to apply, contact information for states, and then just general information on the agency or the funding program. Lastly, there will be always a link for examples of this funding source. So it'll take you to the example section, and we'll just click on the Oregon Ashland Hazard Mitigation Plan. So generally, these examples try to give you a little bit of background information. What was the water quality challenge, or what prompted this project? In Ashland, they were trying to reduce hazards from flooding and protect their surface water system. And they worked with the city's municipal water supply to combat flooding and protect the city's surface water system. They developed their hazard mitigation plan with 10 action items. Those action items included a lot of green infrastructure and low impact development, best management practices to mitigate and treat urban stormwater. And if you keep clicking through, you'll see that there's funding sources. This one was a pilot program, so it had a unique collaboration between FEMA and EPA. And again, just kind of reminding people, like, you have to have that approved hazard mitigation plan to be eligible for the FEMA funds. And this is just a breakdown of like the specific green infrastructure or stormwater protection or stormwater management activities that they implemented in this project. And then if there's multiple partners or stakeholders involved, we'll list that here. Sometimes we'll have contact information or just web page for learning more about this specific case study. Okay, so I think we're at time or close to for questions, and so I wanted to make sure we allotted some time for questions in case anyone had some follow-up.
Yeah, we do have 2 questions that came in from Patty Algus. I don't know if you guys can see them as well, probably, but one is, does the tool include new competitive programs from IIJA? So
Yeah, I can take that. So IIJA is the infrastructure bill that I forget exactly, something in Jobs Act, Infrastructure and Jobs Act. We have been calling it the bipartisan infrastructure law. And I think we're going to have a chance to talk about that a little bit later, but no, that is not included in our tool because our tool was released, I think, right before the law was signed. So we do not have that information incorporated in some of those new competitive programs. I don't think are off the ground yet. But I think we do have some time on the the schedule today to talk about the SRF side of that. So we're going to have one of our colleagues talk about that.
I wonder if it makes sense to kind of hold off on that second question then,
Sure.
in light of that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we'll put a pin for now. And yeah, we're kind of right on time to move over down our agenda to Maggie Cunningham from EPA Region 3 to talk about the infrastructure law and the state revolving fund memo. Maggie, are you ready?
Yes, thank you, Megan.
Thank you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you sound great.
Great. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Maggie Cunningham. I am with EPA Region 3, and I am the Clean Water State Revolving Fund Coordinator for Region 3. And I'm currently the acting drinking water SRF coordinator for Region 3 until we hire a replacement. I was asked to talk a little bit about the bipartisan infrastructure law, which is bringing a once in a generation funding for infrastructure. But before I get into the bipartisan law, I just want to make sure everyone understands exactly how the SRF programs work. They are essentially a bank within the state. In the center here, EPA gives an annual grant to the state SRF that is usually multi-millions of dollars. And then they give another grant for the drinking water SRF, which works as a separate grant. The states usually have to match 20% from their state legislature. And then the state SRF loans that money out to projects. Right? The money comes back after those loans, after the projects are built, the money comes back to the state. You can see the green arrow goes back to the state. It does not go back to EPA. So those
Maggie?
funds are revolving. Go ahead,
Maggie, I'm
Megan.
sorry to interrupt you. We're not seeing your screen. So
Oh,
I just
no.
heard you reference your slide and I was like, oh no.
All right, hold on.
Sorry about that.
No, thank you for interrupting me. And I can't get back to the main. All right. It should be showing this. Can you see it now?
Not yet. So yeah, you
Okay,
had it
let's-
open, you minimized it, now you're in
Alrighty.
the share. Okay, I'm starting to see it now.
Okay, great.
Whew.
Thank you.
All right,
Okay.
thank you.
All right, so the SRF's in the middle, EPA gives them a grant, states match with 20%. The green arrows, money goes out to the projects, it comes back to the state, it does not go back to EPA or the state treasury. All right. That money revolving, the Clean Water SRF has been around for 35 years now. There's a lot of money revolving. The Drinking Water State Revolving Fund's been around for 25 years, and they still have some money revolving. This down the bottom here is an opportunity for the state SRFs can go out to the bond market and raise additional money if they want to, but then some of the loan money coming back has to go to repay those bonds. All right. So just quickly, I want everyone to see this is what the 2021 grant was in millions of dollars to the states in Region 3. But this is what they had available to loan out. And this was all before the bipartisan bill came into effect. This is going to continue. All right. So the bipartisan infrastructure law is bringing 5 new pots or buckets of money to the SRFs. All right. The first bucket in both programs is a general supplemental bucket. And it allows us to use the money for any existing eligible project. It does require the states to provide 10% match. So as opposed to the 20% that they normally have to provide, they only have to provide 10% for this bucket. Also, Congress has required that 49% of these 2 buckets be provided in loan forgiveness. That's money that does not have to be repaid. And I will talk about that. I have a separate slide on that. This next bucket is called emerging contaminants. it is 100% loan forgiveness, and it does not require any state match. And then this last bucket is lead service line money. Also, 49% needs to be provided in loan forgiveness, and it does not have a state match. So what is additional subsidy? It's also called principal forgiveness, loan forgiveness. Plenty of attorneys call it, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a grant, right? And that's exactly what it looks like. However, we call it loan forgiveness because there are certain federal requirements that then transfer to the borrower if it's a grant. So we like to call it loan forgiveness. Loan forgiveness can be 5% of the loan, it can be 50% of the loan, it can be 100% of the loan. You can see I'm late for other meetings. So we have, the SRF programs have had the ability to give loan forgiveness since 2010, but Congress changes the percentages all the time. So every year we get a new allotment from Congress and it has a different percentage in it. So it's ranged over the years, right? So again, Bill General Supplemental is 49, Bill Lead Service Line is 49, Bill Emerging Contaminants is 100%. Okay. It is important to understand that the drinking water SRF, under that program, additional subsidy can only go to disadvantaged communities, right? And the state defines those in their intended use plan. The clean water SRF has to follow the affordability criteria that's established in the intended use plan. And generally that affordability criteria is targeted to municipalities or local governments. But there is a portion that can go to Sourcewater Protection, to farmers, to homeowners. It's not just reserved for communities. So, oh, sorry, I went backwards. Take a deep breath. It's a nice, pretty graph. The purple on this graph, you can see down the y-axis here is each state's SRF program in Region 3. The purple is the amount of the federal grant that the states got last year as part of 2021. The blue shaded is their allotments from the bill for 2022. This is 1 year's worth of money that's now available. All right. Again, this is just the federal portion. There's still the 20% state match on the base, the 10% state match on the light blue, and whatever's revolving in the fund is also available. Right. And you can see, yes, Pennsylvania, that is $200 million that Pennsylvania's drinking water SRF has this year. And although your project might not qualify for lead service line replacement, the projects that do qualify for that used to be back here in the base. So that means there's more money down here that's available for Sourcewater Protection. Okay, I'll just leave this in here. These are the exact amounts from the slide. What is an emerging contaminant project? That's an excellent question. We are still trying to work all that out, but mostly for drinking water systems, it's focusing on PFAS and making the drinking water safe. All right. There is also any project that addresses a contaminant that's listed on EPA's contaminant candidate list. And this is the website for that, for the CCL. Also, the bill memorandum does include a list of project ideas. So, on the clean water SRF, the definition of emerging contaminants is a lot more involved, but it does include PFAS as well. So I'll just leave that in there for folks to digest. If you have any project ideas, then the state SRFs, as well as myself, we would be very interested in hearing about it. Okay, very quickly, eligibilities. Clean water SRF and drinking water SRF, you need to have an eligible borrower and an eligible project. Okay, the eligible costs for the project include any initial sampling, planning, design, construction, equipment, land acquisition. Ineligible costs are generally operation and maintenance, any fines or penalties that a community has to pay for because of an enforcement action. Routine monitoring is not considered eligible, and trading credits are not eligible. All right, for the drinking water eligibilities, the borrower needs to be the utility or the community water system. All right, that the borrower can be publicly or privately owned. That doesn't matter on the drinking water SRF. And these are just the general categories of projects that are eligible. For the clean water SRF, if it's a wastewater project, if it's public, it has to be publicly owned for a wastewater utility or privately owned if it's in a national estuary. All right. Oh, I went too fast. Okay. Other clean water eligibilities that are not wastewater. All right. The eligible borrowers is anyone. All right. The eligible projects, again, these are just general categories. If you have any question about whether the project you have in mind is eligible, you should feel free to email your state representative, your state SRF person, or go ahead and send me an email as well if you want to. I'm providing these links. This is me down here. But all the state contacts are available here. For clean water, for the clean water program, this is the state contact links for drinking water. And if you're interested in any additional information related to infrastructure, the bipartisan infrastructure bill law, there's your link there. That's all I have, Megan. I know I went fast, so I want to leave it open for questions.
No, I think that's great. We're getting close to our hour mark, so you all did wonderful with timeframes, I think. We did have another question that had been shared out before. If there's a map or a list of areas that are considered disadvantaged, to address the match requirement being lowered that you had referenced earlier, Maggie. So.
Yeah, the match and whether a community is disadvantaged are actually two different things. The match comes from the state legislature. Okay, there's no match on an SRF loan that the local borrower has to provide. Also, the SRF loans can be used as match for other federal grant programs. So if you have, like, if a borrower, if there's a project, you're getting some grant money, but you still need match for that grant money, you can go to the SRF and get a very low interest loan for that match, or possibly even principal forgiveness, loan forgiveness for the match. All right. Disadvantaged, you follow the criteria that is in the state's intended use plan, the SRF intended use plan. Each state is slightly different.
Kara, did you have additional information that you were going to
Yeah,
share?
I was gonna share some on the drinking water state revolving fund set-asides that are specific for source water protection, but I know we're running out of time. So I just want to check in with the organizers if they'd like me to go through those, or if you want to do some more Q&A, and I can just drop some fact sheet links in the chat.
Currently, I'm not seeing any more Q&A. We have about 5 minutes, so
Sure.
and the only other question I'm seeing is about sharing the PowerPoint slides and
Absolutely.
Okay. So Maggie, can you stop sharing?
Oh,
And then April,
sure.
can you pull up the set-aside slides? So Maggie gave a great overview of the SRFs, and they do parallel the drinking water and clean water and a lot of things, but the drinking water SRF, when it was established, Congress gave states the opportunity to choose to set aside a portion of their money from EPA for non-gray infrastructure priorities that also support the delivery of safe drinking water. So, it's a balancing act for the states to decide any money that they set aside doesn't go out for loans and doesn't revolve back with interest. So, it's a balancing act, as you can see here, trade-off, if they decide to spend this money or reserve this money for non-infrastructure stuff versus giving it out as part of their revolving loan. The eligibilities for set-asides are different than for the loans purposely. They were set up to support other types of activities. And like I mentioned, they're unique to the drinking water, although the bill just gave the clean water a little administrative set-aside. So next slide, or you can click forward. So there are 4 different set-asides in the DWSRF. I'm going to focus on these last 2, the 10% and the 15% that have eligibilities related to, specifically related to source water protection. Each of these can in some way support source water protection type activities, but the 10 and 15% have specific eligibilities. Next. So the 10% set aside, that means that states can take up to 10% of their capitalization grant that they get from EPA every year for state program management. And here I've got the eligibilities listed that are in the statute. Many of our states do take this set aside. From the source water point of view, they can be used and often are to fund staff. So your state source water protection coordinators are often funded through this portion of the DWSRF. Next slide. And then the 15% set aside can be used for a broad variety of activities as listed here. Different types of activities for source water protection, as well as capacity development. A detail here is that up to 10% of the capitalization grant can be used for kind of any one of these, categories of activities. But that can add up to a total of 15% of the capitalization grant. And this includes loans to public water supplies, public water systems for land acquisition. The state of Maine has had a land acquisition loan program for a number of years, and they've had success for that. Not many other states have taken advantage of this eligibility for a variety of reasons, but with all this new money that's come from the bill, we're really encouraging states to reassess how they've used their set-asides historically. And Maggie showed you just the large increase in money. And for each of those pots of money, they have eligible set-asides. So for example, with the emerging contaminants pot of money, you can use the set-asides for emerging contaminants type activities. And even thinking about just the supplemental, general supplemental pot of money, you can take 10% for the state program management or 15% for local assistance. So there's a lot of new money available if states choose to set aside for non-infrastructure programs like source water protection. Source water assessments are can be supported by this 15% set aside, as well as updates to assessments. The italicized lettering here refers to changes that came in 2018 with the America's Water Infrastructure Act. So the final eligibility here about the establishment and implementation of wellhead protection programs. The statute used to end there, but with the with the WIA in 2018, they added language that includes the implementation of efforts to protect source water. So again, encouraging states to reassess how they've been using their set-asides and can think more broadly about how these funds can help support source water protection. I think that's the last slide I have. Oh, one more. So these are the some examples of types of activities that can be supported with that 15% set aside. We've got a number of fact sheets on this, and I see some other folks have added some links to the chat, so that's great. It's 1:59, so I'm gonna stop. Just wanted to make you aware.
Yeah, it was all good information. So, you know, it seemed like it was kind of coming to its natural conclusion. I didn't want to interrupt you, Kara, but that was great. Thank you. Yeah, we are kind of running up to that natural kind of endpoint to today's webinar. Thank you again. Hearty thanks to our panelists today, Kara, April, Maggie, for sharing all this wonderful information, and to our partners in planning this. Again, EPA Region 3 Sourcewater team, especially Virginia Vasilati, Brian, and the Octoraro Sourcewater Collaborative as well, kind of in pulling all these folks together to have us join today and learn all this great information. Thank you again so much for sharing with us. I am not seeing any additional questions. We might just give it a little bit of time to see if anything else filters in, but I'm seeing some thanks coming in on the chat as well. And yeah, thanks everybody so much for joining and participating today. I think it was really great to have all this information shared with our partners.
Yes, thank you all. Thanks for organizing this, and I'm glad we got to share with you today. I've dropped my email in the chat there, so if you have any other follow-up questions, feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much.
Same here, Megan. You know where to find me.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye all.